I am at a race circuit just outside Barcelona in Spain with the Formula Drift World Champion Frederic Aspo sat next to me, teaching me how to drift. I spent the morning with Seen Through Glass and TGE TV. How in the hell did I get here? I'm here chiefly because of two people, Akio and Andy. The Akio I speak of is Akio Toyoda, current CEO of Toyota Motor Corporation and grandson of founding member Kiichiro Toyoda. Now, like his grandfather, Akio really loves motorsports and thoroughly believes that it is a great way to improve his company's product and brand. Now, he's a very, very cool guy. When he wasn't CEO, he was still spearheading projects like the ISF and the LFA for Lexus. Now he's in charge, he's on a mission to make Toyota a sporty and cool company again. One of the first things that he's doing is to take Toyota's motorsports efforts and unite them under one banner. And that banner is Gazoo Racing, a company you're certainly going to be hearing a lot more of in the coming years. Gazoo is derived from the Japanese word for garage, apparently. And not only are Gazoo Racing responsible for Toyota Motorsports efforts in categories as diverse as the World Endurance Championship and the World Rally Championship, but they've also been tasked with creating a series of road cars, some of which are based on Toyota's existing cars and some of which are going to be built from the ground up by the Gazoo Racing boys. Now in future, you can expect to see GR or GRMN as trim levels on certain cars, including the upcoming Supra. Now GR stands of course for Gazoo Racing. GRMN stands for Gazoo Racing tuned by the Meisters of the Nürburgring. That is going to be Toyota's equivalent to the RS brand, or M division if you will, and it's going to represent the sportiest cars that the company offers. Now the first car that's going to bear that name and be really on wide sale is not one that you would necessarily expect. It's this, the Toyota Yaris GRMN. And fear not, for those of you who remember the Citroën C4 by Loeb, this is not just a set of stickers on top of a normal Yaris. This car was commissioned to commemorate Toyota's return into the World Rally Championship. They are making only 400 of them for the European market, with a further 200 being sold in Japan, where it is branded as a Vitz. And believe me, underneath this car has undergone an extensive reworking to make it a proper little driver's car. And that's quite significant because throughout this car's entire development cycle, the priority has been not just on producing impressive numbers, but on a car which is enjoyable to drive. Toyota currently have a real commitment to making cars fun again. This is why they continue to produce vehicles like the GT86. On paper, they don't always make a lot of sense, but that's not what it's about. And for people that watch this channel, I'm pretty sure you agree that a car being fun and a car being fast can often be two very, very different things. So Andy is a very big fan of the channel, and he also works for Toyota GB. And he found himself in the position of being able to invite me out here for the press launch of this car, because he knew that it was the sort of car that both myself and my viewers would be interested in. So thanks for that, Andy. Let's now take a look at what changes have been made by the Gazoo Racing team to this fairly humble Super Mini. The heart and soul of any car, of course, is its engine, and in a hot hatchback, arguably even more so. Now, under the bonnet of the Yaris GRMN, you will find a 1.8 litre supercharged Toyota 2ZR FE. Now, if that engine sounds familiar, it's because it's the same engine currently used in the Lotus Elise. Now, this is a Magnuson-Eaton supercharger producing 1.8 bar of boost, and it had this very, very clever installation here because the supercharger, the intercooler and the air intake are basically all one very, very cleverly installed lump, which was put together with the help of the boys at Lotus. It produces 210 horsepower and around 184 pound-foot of torque. Of course, being a supercharger, not a turbocharger, you have instant on power even if you sacrifice a little bit of low down shove. I really like the decision to put a supercharger in this car, and I can tell you that it gives the car a really different character to many other hot hatches out there. The car also has a Torsen limited slip differential. It's got a slightly uprated 6-speed gearbox, and because it weighs only 1135 kilos, you have best in class power to weight ratio. It's got 30 horsepower more than the Fiesta ST, which weighs a similar amount, but it's 200 kilos lighter than an equivalent Polo GTI. The chassis and handling is where this car has had by far the most attention lavished upon it, and that does genuinely start from the chassis up, which receives extra bracing in certain key areas. This also uses the stronger subframe from the hybrid version of the Yaris. There is a strut brace here at the front. You have Sachs Performance dampers and shocks, which ride 24 millimeters lower. That's basically an inch lower than the standard Yaris. You have these really pretty BBS forged alloys. They save 2 kilos of unsprung mass per corner. At the front, you have larger brakes than the standard Yaris. The rear is the standard items, but they're both painted in this lovely white with the GRMN logo on them. And the car also wears Bridgestone Potenza REO50A tyres. Now, we tried these on track yesterday, and they were really good. The journalist that drove the car last week got to try it with an even stickier track-only tyre. Now, apparently it works absolutely brilliantly, and you just can't really find the chassis limit, even with Super City tyres. But what you found with these tyres is the car is very playful, very safe, and very predictable. It's a really good handling car. On the interior, there are a few little details to raise this above the level of a regular Yaris. Most notably, you have this gorgeous steering wheel, which is lifted directly from the second generation GT86. You also have dials, which are exclusive to the GRMN, and you have these absolutely stunning seats, which Toyota are rightly very proud of. They're made in-house by their department they call Bushoku. These are the same guys responsible for the seats in the Lexus LFA. Now, you wouldn't know it to look at them, but these are actually standard Yaris seat frames. They have, however, been comprehensively re-engineered and reupholstered to provide a nice sporty feel. These worked quite well on track, and they're available only in this ultra suede finish. As you know, I'm not a massive fan of that kind of finish, but it's the only place in the car that it appears, and on a seat it does work quite well and stops you sliding about too much. On a hot day like today, it also keeps you a little bit cooler. The rest of the car features mostly leather or leather effect materials, which I really like. And the rest of the interior is basically standard Yaris, and that includes the sat-nav and multimedia screen here, which is probably one of the few weak points of the car that I've identified so far, because when you've got bright sunny conditions, that is very hard to read. Overall though, this is quite a nice place to be. I'd say it's much more impressive than I thought it might be. Yes, you can tell in some ways that the basic Yaris is a very cheap car, but the point of a hot hatch has to always be to deliver an impressive drive within a reasonably ordinary package. Speaking of packaging, the main visual differentiators of this over a regular Yaris are the fact it's available only in a 3-door body shell in this white color with the sticker pack, which is optional. You have the very different front bumper, you have this small but beautifully formed rear wing, and you have this center exit exhaust. Now, this is not just for show. Yes, it apes the look of the Yaris WRC car, but this also hides a proper rally exhaust system, as Toyota call it. Now, what that means in layman's terms is effectively a custom exhaust system from the manifolds backwards. This apparently was one of the biggest problems that the engineers faced during the entire project, because in the regular Yaris floor pan, there is no room for a sporty exhaust, so it took an awful lot of clever thinking to manage to get this in the car. Now, this is somewhat quieter than the prototype cars that journalists drove a few months ago, but it still sounds very nice and very fruity with a good amount of volume, but also a lot of character. And that's come from the fact that they've chosen to use a supercharger rather than a turbocharger, which will always rob an engine of a little bit of sound and character. Now, you can see that silencer box just hanging down there. When you follow these cars, it's one of the main things that takes your attention, and I think it's got something of a little bit of a race car look about it. It reminds me in some ways of the gearbox you could see hanging out the back of an old Ferrari. But enough talk about the car. Let's see what it's like to drive. I had two particularly large concerns when it came to this car. The first would be that the seating position would be too high, and that's because it's too high in basically 90% of all of the modern cars that I drive now. But it's not too bad. Yeah, sure, I'd like it a little bit lower, but I am the person that put lower seats in their Lotus, so bear that in mind. And my other concern was that this car would be far too stiff. A few reasons for that. Of course, whenever anyone says that anything is being developed on the Nürburgring, that's always a danger. The second reason being that this car has the same type of suspension setup as the Civic FN2. Now that is a McPherson strut setup at the front with a simple torsion bar at the rear. And the problem with setups like those is that you generally are only able to tune them either for handling, i.e. basically make them really stiff, or make them comfy. You can never really get them to do a bit of both. Now the engineers have apparently backed this off some way from what it was in the prototype. It still rides on the firm side, but it's not as stiff as I feared it might be. I would certainly say it's perhaps no worse than a mini John Cooper Works, let's say that. Now what that does give you, however, is a very, very playful car. It's really, really good fun to throw around corners. I'm going to try and find some good corners that are not quite as unbelievably steep and narrow as these, so that I can show you what the car is all about. The car's gearbox isn't quite as good as that in, say, the GT86, which I spent quite a bit of time in this weekend, but it's still pretty decent. It's fairly nice to work your way through the gears. The engine certainly requires that you do so. Now, interestingly, compared to the GT86, this car is over a second quicker in the 0 to 62 dash, and this car actually has to change into third when it records its 0 to 62 time. So that tells you a lot. First off, this car is probably a lot quicker than you think it is. 6.4 seconds to 62 is not slow, but neither is it really going to set the world on fire in 2018. However, it also tells you really that Toyota weren't worried about numbers. They just wanted to make it drive right. And it really does. The steering is electric and there's not the biggest amount of feedback coming through it, but I do get a good amount of texture, and I get texture through the seat as well. It is nice and direct. It's perhaps a little on the light side, but it's enjoyable. For throwing the car around tight little roads like this, I know kind of what it's doing. It's a fairly quick rack, it's about 2.3 turns, lock to lock. The car's red line is just below 7,000 RPM. That last 1,000, it really, really pulls in air and you can hear it. That's the dominant sound in here. It's not supercharger whine, it's intake noise. It's quite incredible. And it does pick up speed fairly quickly. The smaller steering wheel is really, really nice in the hand and makes a big difference to the way this car drives and feels, I think. That combined with these seats helps make this feel really special. And it's important, you have to remember that this is a limited production car. This is not a series production car, and there are certain things that happen as a result of that. That's one of the reasons that the price is quite high. It took an awful lot of logistics work for Toyota simply to be able to get these things built. They built them all in one batch, and they had to do that without interrupting the regular Yaris production run at their factory in northern France. And these cars weren't assembled by the regular Yaris team. They were assembled by a team of 20 specialist craftsmen who worked only on these. Toyota are taking this very seriously. You get these strange guys out on hand cycles today. We've seen about 2 of them earlier. Oh, there's another one.
It's the same 2.
Is it the same 2 guys, do you think? Rather them than me. This car sounds really nice, very, very pleasant. I think they've actually judged the volume in the cab pretty much right, and it definitely doesn't sound like an artificial noise that's being piped in here either. This is definitely a car with a playful character. It's not one that's as immediately obvious as something like a John Cooper Works Mini. You're getting something like that and you just want to drive it like a hooligan. The Yaris GRMN is a little bit more restrained. It's a little bit more refined. It's not quite so in your face as that car is. Maybe that's because the sound in the cab is a little more muted at lower RPM. But when you do want to push on, the car really comes alive and the chassis really wants to play. They've done some real magic getting this car to handle this well. And I don't think it is too stiff. I really need to reserve judgment until and if I get the chance to try one of these on UK roads, because they are significantly different to those on the continent. But my first impressions are certainly very, very positive. Car picks up well from about 3,000 RPM all the way to that red line just below 7. Really, the greatest shame of this car is the fact that there are only going to be 100 coming to the UK. And if you like the sound of it, it's basically too late. They're all gone. And that brings me on to the final point, really, the price. It's £26,000, and that is a hell of a lot for a Yaris. There's no two ways about that, and I think Toyota themselves are happy to admit it's pretty bold pricing, but it's necessary because of the way that they've decided to build this car and the attention to detail that they've put into doing so. But if you do have one of these, you're going to have something that is going to be distinctly different from many other hot hatches on the road. There's only 100 in the whole of the UK. You're unlikely to be bumping into these every single time you go out for shopping. I must see at least 3 or 4 Golf Rs every day I go out for a drive. They're pretty common cars. And to a lot of people, a bit of rarity is worth paying that extra for. And the good thing is with the Yaris, that's not all you're paying for. You are getting a great car thrown into the package too. So Toyota, well done. This is a very nice car. Please don't stop here.